everyone, and welcome back to the Living Well with Schizophrenia YouTube channel. In today's video, we decided to Google the phrase, "Can schizophrenics?" and then we are going to be addressing the words or phrases that follow that within the search engine. But first, if you're new here, my name is Lauren and I live with schizoaffective disorder, and I make videos about what it's like living with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. If you would like to help support the creation of videos like this one, please make sure to check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. We're working really hard to keep making valuable resources for our audience, and we would really appreciate any support you can give. Thank you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell notification so as not to miss any future content. All right, so before we dive into talking about the search findings, I just want to make a quick note about the term schizophrenic. So it is not something that I typically use because I typically try to use person-first language as much as possible. So person living with schizophrenia as opposed to schizophrenic. When you use the term schizophrenic, it kind of conflates the person with their illness, which is something that I don't really feel is a good thing. So I try to use person-first language. And if you want to check out a video that goes more in depth into this, we have a video here that you can find here. It is called Language and Schizophrenia, and it just kind of goes more into why it's important to be mindful of the language that you're using. But for the purpose of this video, we know that people often use the term schizophrenic, and so we decided to put into Google, "Can schizophrenics?" because we thought that that would be a more popular search term than "Can people living with schizophrenia blank?" Okay, so getting right into some of the search results, can schizophrenics touch their hallucinations? So I think this is probably a good question if you don't know a lot about schizophrenia, because you would want to know, how real is it for the person who's experiencing hallucinations? Can they interact with them? And I mean, the short answer for me anyway, for me personally, no, I cannot touch my hallucinations. I don't have the tactile hallucinations where I can feel things. But there are some people with schizophrenia who do experience tactile hallucinations. So, I'm not really sure if they can touch their visual hallucinations. But for me personally, I can't. Okay, so the next search term that we want to talk about was, can schizophrenics drive? So this is kind of a funny one to me. I never really gave it a second thought about whether people with schizophrenia could drive or not, because I do drive, and I hope I'm an okay driver. I don't feel that my illness, is too much at play in terms of that. Now, I would hopefully never get into the car while experiencing intense psychosis, because then, yes, my perceptions are altered and my reality is altered, and it might not be the safest thing for me to drive. But on a day-to-day basis, when my symptoms are under control and managed properly, yes, of course I can drive. Now, I think a lot of people wonder this. I've had this asked of me a lot, and so I kind of did some more digging and asked some people that I know who are living with schizophrenia as well, whether or not they drive. And I was kind of surprised to hear that some people who are living with schizophrenia don't drive because, their hallucinations are such that they feel that it would be unsafe to do so. So yes, I can drive, but there are people with schizophrenia who choose not to. All right, so the next one that we want to talk about that we found in the search system was, can schizophrenics drink alcohol? I mean, just like anyone else can, yes, people with schizophrenia can drink alcohol. There might be some deeper implications, though, for people who are living with schizophrenia. I am kind of a social drinker. I do drink alcohol in social situations, but I've kind of come to realize that, the warnings on the antipsychotic medication that say do not consume alcohol while taking this medication are there for a reason. I never really gave it a second thought. I just thought that, I could engage in drinking alcohol the same way anyone else can. But due to the medications that I am taking, it does affect me differently, and it does affect the potency or the effectiveness of the medications that I'm on. So I've kind of tried to reduce the amount of alcohol that I'm consuming for that reason, because I do want the medications that I'm taking to be as effective as possible. And when I do consume alcohol, it does lower the efficacy of it. And I don't feel as great the next day, and sometimes my symptoms are more pronounced. And so I am trying to stay away from it more. I know a lot of people with schizophrenia do tend to self-medicate with things like alcohol, which is another layer to this problem, and something that I would not recommend. Overall, to answer this question, yes, people with schizophrenia can drink alcohol. However, there are some things to be aware of for them that maybe other people don't necessarily have to be aware of. Okay, so the next one is, can schizophrenics live alone? This is another one that kind of strikes me as like, well, yes, of course, because, I've lived alone and I've lived through living alone. It was fine. I do know a lot of people who are living with schizophrenia who do live alone, and, they can manage their symptoms on their own, and they can live, stable lives on their own. I am living with a partner right now, and that has been really helpful in terms of keeping my mental health in a stable place and making sure that I'm engaging in proper self-care and whatnot, and making sure that I'm taking my medications regularly. So, living with someone else is of benefit to people who are dealing with a chronic illness like schizophrenia. However, it is totally possible for people who are living with schizophrenia to live on their own. Now, that said, schizophrenia is kind of a spectrum illness, and there's definitely a degree of varying severity of symptoms that one experiences. And so there are people who are living with schizophrenia who maybe can't live on their own or can't live without people around them. And so there are, group homes, or some people have to live with family, and that's totally okay too. If they know that they need a little bit of extra support, that is fine. But it is possible for some people who are living with schizophrenia to live on their own if they are able to manage their symptoms effectively on their own. I think that this search result is, just indicative of the level of stigma within society. I was told, and even within the medical system, the medical profession, I was told by one psychiatrist in the hospital once that I should be kept in a hospital for the rest of my life. And basically, insinuating that I would never be able to be autonomous or independent in living my own life, and I should be essentially institutionalized. And so, I think a lot of people don't really know how, or if it's possible for someone who's living with an illness like schizophrenia to live on their own and to live independently and to, lead a normal life. And I really want everyone to know that it is possible. And even if the degree of severity of symptoms that someone is experiencing are so much so that they do need to live with someone else, it is still possible for them to live outside of an institution and for them to, engage in life the same way that anybody else might. Okay, so the next one is, can schizophrenics love, and can schizophrenics feel love? And short answer is yes, of course. We are people too, and we can experience the full breadth of emotion that anybody else can experience. And that includes feeling love for other people, and love for ourselves, and love for, whatever. Of course, people who are living with schizophrenia can feel love. In terms of romantic relationships, it might be a little bit harder for someone who's living with schizophrenia to be in a relationship due to symptoms or due to, dealing with a chronic illness. However, it is fully possible. I am in a long-term relationship right now. I have been in them before. I have been in love. I am currently in love. And yes, it is absolutely possible. I think this question that people have is kind of stemming from maybe what they see or what they understand in terms of the negative symptoms that someone who's living with schizophrenia experiences, where, there's more of the flat affect and kind of the despondency and that kind of thing, and which kind of leads people to, wonder if they can experience joy or happiness or love. And so, even if someone is presenting as more flat and whatnot, and, maybe even experiencing less range of emotion, it is still possible for them to experience love. Okay, so the next one is, can schizophrenics have babies? Again, short answer is just like, any other human, they do have the potential to have babies. It's kind of a little bit more of a complicated question than that, because, I myself grapple with the question of whether or not, the morality behind having a baby, because I have schizophrenia. I live with schizophrenia. I know what it's like to have to try to manage an illness like this, and it's very, very hard. And there is a degree of, geneticism linked to passing it on. And so I would not wish that on my child at all, to be living through schizophrenia. However, if one parent has schizophrenia, the chance of their child inheriting it is 10%, which is a lot higher than I would like it to be. However, I think it's a lot lower than most people think it is. I also think about it in terms of if my child does have schizophrenia, I think I would be one of the best suited parents for them to have in terms of helping guide them through it, helping to identify it as early as possible, and helping to, just help them learn how to manage it and how to look at it from a positive light. So yes, people with schizophrenia can have children. I know a lot of people who have the illness who do have biological children. I think that this question kind of stems from people also wondering whether or not someone who has schizophrenia could be fit to be a parent. So not only, the biological component, but also just, what it takes to care for a child and another person. And to that, I just want to say, everyone has their challenges and everyone has their strengths likewise. And so I think that people who are living with schizophrenia also, have these challenges and strengths. And so, yeah, it might be challenging to manage your symptoms in a way that, doesn't affect your children too much, and to parent in a loving way without having your symptoms interfering too much. However, I think that people with schizophrenia typically have a greater capacity for empathy and compassion and that kind of thing. And I think that serves itself wonderfully to having children. I have 2 children right now who are not biologically mine, and it has definitely been a learning curve to learn how to take care of 2 small children while also taking care of myself. And I think those kind of go hand in hand, where I need to know how to take care of myself in order to best take care of them. And so there has been a learning curve in terms of how to manage and juggle all of that. However, it is possible. I am doing it right now. And my partner and I are also discussing having a biological child of our own. And so, I think that I just want to communicate that it is absolutely possible for someone who's living with schizophrenia to parent and to have a child of their own. Okay, so the next one is, can schizophrenics work? Again, there is a variety of severity in terms of symptoms that someone with schizophrenia may experience. And so some people may not be able to work because of their illness, and that's fine. They can still contribute to society in other meaningful ways. However, there is a large subset of people who are living with schizophrenia who are able to work. I have held various jobs throughout my life and, have done so relatively successfully. And I know many other people who are living with schizophrenia who also work successfully. Now, that said, from my own personal experience, it has been harder for me to hold a steady job for long periods of time. This is either because my symptoms started to become more prevalent and I withdrew from my employment, or because my symptoms started to come about more and I needed time off and my employer wasn't really sure how to do that, or I didn't communicate as effectively as I could about what I needed in terms of that time off and that recovery period. If you are living with schizophrenia and you are working, I think that it's really important to have a bit of a contingency plan, hopefully, ideally with your employer, about what happens when your symptoms become more prevalent and you need some time off or a break or of some kind. If you feel comfortable, being honest with your employer about your needs is going to be the best option. Now, that said, there is still a lot of stigma within society, and sometimes it's not the best thing to tell your employer. So if you want to learn more about this, we did a video about knowing when to tell your employer about your illness. So you can check that out at the link here. All right, so the next one is, can schizophrenics recover? In order to answer this question, we kind of need to shift our understanding of the term recover. I think that a lot of people, ask this question in the sense of, can someone with schizophrenia be cured? Or can someone with schizophrenia recover completely and just maintain this stable recovery? However, I think it's important to look at recovery and to understand recovery as more of an ongoing process. And, it's not a linear one. So yes, it is possible for people who are living with schizophrenia to recover. However, they may still have setbacks, or, they may still have flare-ups of symptoms and whatnot. And that's okay. They are still on the journey of recovery, even if that happens. So, I think it's important when talking about recovery to talk about things like, utilizing medication and therapy and social supports, and those things being very important and kind of pillars in terms of getting to or working on recovery. However, I think it's important to understand that even when someone is doing these things, they still have varying degrees of breakthrough symptoms. And so I think it's not so much understanding recovery in terms of being in a place with no symptoms and, managing it so that you have no symptoms of schizophrenia. It's more recovery in the sense of how well you are able to function while managing these symptoms, and how meaningfully you are able to engage in life, and how, just, I guess, more quality of life sort of thing. If you feel that you have a good quality of life, I would define that as being in a place of recovery. All right, and the last one that I want to talk about today is, can schizophrenics live a normal life? So, first thing that comes to mind with this is, what is a normal life? I think that there is such a varying degree of ways that someone can live their life. And so, who gets to define what normal is? I think that it's important to convey that people who are living with schizophrenia are people first and foremost, just like anyone else. And so, how they live their life is normal. They are people and they are living their life normally. I think that this question is kind of getting at, can they engage the same way a neurotypical person would engage in life, working, having a family, engaging in those milestones of life. And yes, it is possible for someone who's living with schizophrenia to do all that. It may look a little different at certain points just because of, also having the added challenge of managing symptoms and whatnot. And that can interfere in terms of, life trajectory, and in terms of how you are able to live a normal life. My life trajectory has definitely changed at various periods as a result of my illness. But, I think that's okay. I think that regardless of having those periods of, altered life trajectory or less stability or whatnot, I was still living my life in a way that, was still meaningful and that was still productive in terms of contributing to society and the people around me and whatnot. So, again, what is normal? But that aside, yes, someone who's living with schizophrenia can live a normal life. All right, so that wraps up the list of what we came across when we searched for the phrase, can schizophrenics blank? So, I think that searching for that phrase is a really good indication of taking kind of a litmus test about public perception about schizophrenia. And it really helped me to understand where people are at in terms of their understanding of what schizophrenia is and what people who are living with schizophrenia are capable of or can do or that kind of thing. So it was good to address those things, and I hope that if you're watching this video, you found it helpful for me to answer some of these most searched questions. All right, so if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please make sure to like it, and also feel free to comment if you have any further thoughts on any of the questions that we talked about today. Also, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like it, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss anything. Also, again, just a quick reminder that if you enjoy our content and you find it helpful or valuable at all, please make sure to check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much again for watching, and as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. See you in the next video. Bye.